Welcome to English Insight, where language meets the past in the most fascinating way. In today's journey, we're not just learning English, we're traveling through history to do it. Imagine practicing your English while discovering the secrets of ancient civilizations, the rise and fall of empires, and the lives of people who shaped the world we live in. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a language adventure. We'll explore key vocabulary, natural phrases, and real spoken English, all while immersing ourselves in timeless stories from the past. Whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or just love learning through storytelling, this video is made to help you improve your English listening and speaking skills, one historical moment at a time. So grab your headphones, relax, and let's travel through time the English Insight way. Let's begin. Discovering a cozy bookshop. Ella hadn't planned to turn down the narrow alley. The map on her phone had glitched, and the cafe she'd meant to visit was nowhere in sight. The street was barely more than a side path between buildings-worn cobblestones, ivy curling around rusted iron gates, and that comforting hush cities rarely allow. Something made her keep walking. Then she saw it. Nestled between a flower shop and a vintage tailor's, the little bookshop looked like something out of a storybook. Faded green paint framed tall windows filled with books in artful, lopsided stacks. The gold lettering on the sign above the door read "The Little Bookshop on the Corner," delicate and slightly chipped, like a beloved heirloom. Without thinking, Ella reached for the door. A bell overhead chimed softly somewhere between a whisper and a memory. Inside, time slowed. The space was small, but impossibly deep, with crooked wooden shelves that leaned into one another like old friends. The scent of paper, binding glue, and something faintly herbal, perhaps tea-wrapped. Around her, cat with storm gray fur lounged atop a book cart, marked "New Arrivals." Sunlight filtered through lace curtains at the windows, falling in golden patterns across the worn rug. "Hello there," came a voice, warm and calm. A man stood behind the counter, a hardcover in his hands. He looked to be in his 30s. Glasses perched at the end of his nose with ink smudges on his fingers. "First time here." Ella nodded, brushing a windblown curl from her cheek. "I think I took a wrong turn." "There's no such thing in here," he replied with a smile. Books have a way of finding the right people at the right time. He returned to his reading, not pressing conversation, which she appreciated. Ella wandered slowly, fingertips trailing along spines, pausing to flip through titles both familiar and foreign. In the back corner, she found a worn armchair, a little frayed at the arms, a tartan throw folded neatly across the back. Next to it sat a low table with a steaming teapot and a chipped mug. A small sign read, "Help yourself. Stay as long as you like." She sat. An hour passed, maybe two. She read 3 chapters of a book she'd never heard of, jotted notes in her journal, and poured herself a cup of tea. Every so often, the shopkeeper would glance over, not to interrupt, but to share in the quiet. When she finally rose to leave, the cat had migrated to her lap without her noticing. She gently set it down and walked to the counter. "I'll take this one," she said, holding up the book. "Good choice," he said. "It's a slow burn, much like the shop." She smiled. "I think I'll be back. We'll be here." Back on the street, the world felt louder, faster, but she held a little quiet with her now, tucked between pages and possibilities. The cafe could wait. Some detours, she realized, were meant to become destinations. Meeting the mysterious owner. It had been 3 weeks since Ella first wandered into the little bookshop on the corner. Since that rainy afternoon, she'd visited almost every other day. It wasn't a conscious decision, more of a gentle pull. Like the way the scent of cinnamon and old pages had wrapped itself around her mind. Some days she read for hours in the back corner armchair, sipping tea and letting the shop's stillness seep into her bones. Other times, she stayed for mere minutes. scanning the new arrival's cart while exchanging pleasantries with Simon. The quiet bookseller who always seemed to remember exactly what she needed to read, but today felt different. The sky had threatened. Storm since morning, heavy with clouds, and by the time Ella arrived, rain was coming down in silvery sheets. She stepped into the shop with a grateful sigh, shaking droplets from her umbrella. The familiar bell chimed above her, and she looked toward the counter, expecting to see Simon hunched over a ledger or reading some obscure poetry. But he wasn't there. Instead, the shop was quieter than usual. The air held the same warm scent, but there was something else beneath it. A hush, like a theater curtain about to lift. Ella stepped farther inside, listening to the gentle creak of the floorboards under her boots. "Simon," she called, her voice soft, uncertain. No answer came, but a soft, scratching sound echoed from the back. It wasn't the usual rustling of pages or the scrape of a chair. It sounded careful, deliberate. She hesitated, then walked past the poetry shelves and the old globe that always pointed to the wrong continent. The scratching grew louder as she neared the back hallway, the one she'd always assumed led to storage. The door at the end was cracked open. Candlelight flickered beyond. Ella hesitated. This wasn't her space. She was a guest reader, a visitor. But curiosity and something else, a strange sense of welcome, drew her forward. She knocked gently on the doorframe. The scratching stopped. For a moment, all she heard was the rain on the roof and her own breath. Then came a voice, low and composed. "Come in, if you like." She pushed the door open slowly. The room was unlike any part of the shop she'd seen. It wasn't cluttered or chaotic, but precise and old-world elegant. Bookcases lined the walls, though these held leather-bound tomes and ledgers rather than colorful novels. In the center sat a large mahogany desk, and behind it was a man she had never seen before. He looked up as she entered. His hair was silver-streaked but thick, combed back neatly. His face held the kind of stillness that comes from either great patience or long solitude. He wore a waistcoat, dark green velvet, with buttons that caught the candlelight. His eyes, a curious shade of pale gray, regarded her not with suspicion, but with an almost amused curiosity. I'm sorry," Ella stammered, half turning to leave. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just looking for Simon." "You're Ella," the man said. She froze. "How do you know my name?" "I keep records," he replied with a slight smile, tapping a thick book on the desk. "And Simon speaks of you often. You've made quite the impression." Ella flushed. "Not sure I've done anything to deserve that." "You came back," he said simply. "That's more than most." A pause stretched between them before he stood, extending a hand. "I'm Malcolm. I suppose you might call me the owner, though this place is more stewarded than owned." She shook his hand. His grip was firm, but not overbearing. "Malcolm? It's nice to meet you. And you, Ella." She glanced around the study again, her curiosity piqued. "This room, it's beautiful." "It doesn't feel like the rest of the shop." Malcolm gave a soft chuckle. "That's deliberate. The shop is meant to feel like home. This room is older, little more private." She nodded, eyes falling. On the ledgers stacked beside the candle, she keep records of the customers. "Not just customers," Malcolm said, settling back into his chair. "People, stories, where they're at when they find the shop, what books they're drawn to, how they change afterward." Ella's brow furrowed. "You track people." "In a manner of speaking," he said, "but not like a census taker, more like a gardener, watching things grow. Some never return. Others come every week for years. The shop calls people when they need it." She sat on the old settee near the bookcase, unsure if she was meant to, but feeling as though she belonged. "Calls them." Malcolm looked at her with those pale, piercing eyes. You don't think it was an accident you found? The shop, do you? Ella opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. When she'd wandered in that first day, she'd told herself it was just coincidence, a wrong turn. But the more she thought about it, the more it felt like fate. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe I was looking for something I didn't realize I needed. Malcolm nodded. Exactly. He opened one of the ledgers and turned it toward her. There, in careful handwriting, was her name. Ella Marianne Holt. Age 28. Occupation, freelance designer. First visit, June 3rd. Favorite genres, memoir, historical fiction, travelogues. She blinked. That's a little creepy. Malcolm laughed, not unkindly. Perhaps, but I don't keep records to control people, only to understand them. This place, it wants to help. It always has. But it needs someone to interpret its language. Ella studied the entry. It says, I like travelogues. I didn't even know that until last week. You lingered by that section 3 times before picking one up, he said. Sometimes the heart knows before the mind catches up. There was a long silence. The rain had eased outside. Inside, the candlelight seemed brighter. Can I ask you something? She said at last. Of course. Why don't you come out front? If you're the owner, why hide back here? Malcolm's smile faded into something more distant. Because I found I'm better at watching than interacting. The shop is better at introductions than I am. Simon has a gentler touch. Ella tilted her head. But you've created something incredible. People love it. I love it. Why stay in the shadows? He hesitated. Not all stories need a main character. Some of us are pages helping others find their place. Ella studied him. There was something in his voice, regret, maybe, or weariness. Maybe, she said softly, but even pages deserve to be read. Malcolm looked at her sharply, and for a moment something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. Then he gave a small, almost reluctant smile. You may be right. She stood and wandered over to one of the shelves, tracing her fingers along the leather spines. One book stood out unlabeled, bound in dark blue cloth. She pulled it down and opened it. The pages were blank. Ah, Malcolm said. That one is waiting to be written. Ella raised an eyebrow. A journal, something like that, he replied. A gift, if you want it. She looked at him, unsure. Why me? He stood slowly, walking over to the window where the rain had begun again, soft and steady. Because I think you're ready to write your story, instead of just reading everyone else's. Ella closed the book gently. Her fingers tightened around its spine. For a moment, she thought about asking what he meant, how he knew what she was struggling with, the dreams she'd put on hold, the relationships that hadn't worked. But somehow, she didn't need to. He already knew. Or maybe the shop did. I'll take it, she said quietly. He nodded. Good. As she left the study, the candlelight flickering behind her, she felt a strange sense of peace. Simon had returned to the front, sorting a stack of returns. He looked up and smiled. Find everything you needed. Ella glanced down at the book in her hands. More than I expected. She paid for a small paperback something about quiet revolutions and gardens and stepped out into the rain. The blue book wrapped in brown paper under her arm. That night, she lit a candle at her windowsill and opened the book to the first page. Her pen hovered above the blank paper, unsure. Then she began to write. She didn't know if it was a memoir, a journal, or something in between. All she knew was that the story was hers, and somewhere, tucked between shelves and shadowed rooms, the little bookshop was still watching, still waiting for the next person who needed to be found. Helping organize books sans strange find. It started with a knock on the window and a handwritten sign. Ella had only meant to pass by that morning. The clouds were thick, the air humid and restless with the promise of rain. She hadn't planned on going into the little bookshop on the corner, not today, but when she glanced toward the front window, she noticed something different. A small chalkboard hung on the inside of the glass. Volunteers needed sorting the archives. Tea provided. Curiosity encouraged. She smiled. Of course the shop would phrase it like that, inside. The familiar scent of bergamot and dusted pages welcomed her like an old friend. The bell above. The door chimed, and Simon looked up from the counter, surprised but clearly pleased. Ella. Perfect timing. She raised an eyebrow. Let me guess you wrote the sign knowing I'd walk by. Simon gave a sheepish grin. The shop knows things. I just write them down. She rolled her eyes affectionately and hung her raincoat by the door. So what kind of organizing are we talking about? Alphabetical. Genre, chaos. He gestured toward the rear hallway, the one that led past the poetry shelves, and toward the mystery section, then down a set of narrow stairs. The archives, he said in a tone both ominous and amused. Ella blinked. There's a basement. Simon nodded. Well, sort of. More like a lower level. Malcolm used to call it the vault, but that made people nervous. It's mostly just old books, donation boxes, and forgotten shelves. She hesitated. And you're sending me in alone? He grinned. I'll bring tea. She followed him down the creaking stairs, the walls narrowing slightly as they descended, into cooler air. The lighting was soft yellow from antique sconces that flickered faintly, but it gave the space a kind of intimate charm. The archives were indeed more spacious than she'd expected for large rooms branching out from a central corridor, each filled with stacks of unsorted boxes, bundled books, and unlabeled shelves. A small table sat in the center with an old brass lamp, a teapot, and 2 cups already waiting. You've done this before, she said. Impressed, Simon smiled. You'd be amazed what people donate without even opening the boxes. You might find anything in here. That's what worries me, he laughed. Start with room 2. That one hasn't been touched in years. Ella pulled her sleeves up and ventured into the second room on the right. The air smelled different here, not bad, but older, like cedar and velvet and dust that had seen decades. Shelves lined the walls, some empty, others groaning under the weight of aged hardcovers, spiral notebooks, and even a few VHS tapes. In the corner, several cardboard boxes leaned precariously against one another, each marked with faded handwriting. She sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the top box. Inside were old travel guides: Paris, 1982, Nepal, 1975, Rome, undated, and covered in notes. Tucked between them was a slim, leather-bound journal. It had no title, no author. The edges were gold-leafed, the kind you had to see from just the right angle. She set it aside, intrigued but committed to sorting first. For the next hour, she worked through the rest of the boxes. Some were full of duplicate paperbacks, some children's books, and a surprisingly high number of cookbooks from the 1960s. Every so often, Simon would check in with a fresh cup of tea and a quiet comment about some oddity he'd found in room 4 today. It was a 1987 invoice for 20 pounds of dried lavender, handwritten in green ink. I think someone tried to turn the shop into a perfumery, he mused. Ella laughed and pointed to the journal. Well, at least this smells normal. He peered at it curiously. That's not one I recognize. Might be one of Malcolm's. Think he'd mind if I peeked? Simon hesitated, then shook his head. If it found its way to you, the shop probably wants you to read it. That answer shouldn't have made sense, but somehow it did. Later, when she'd finished reorganizing the shelves and stacking the donation duplicates, she curled up in the corner chair beside the lamp and opened the journal. The handwriting inside was elegant, looping, but not overly ornate. The first page read, "For the one who finds this, know that the shop is not just a place. It is a moment, a memory, a turning point. This journal is not mine alone. It is a collection, voices, fragments, and glimpses. Read carefully. And remember, some stories remember you." Ella blinked, then turned the page. What followed was not a diary exactly. It was a mosaic of entries, some short, some long. Some were clearly dated, some weren't. Some were letters. Others were almost poetic. A few read like confessions, and the strangest part, some were in different handwriting. Slight variations, different pens, even different languages. It was as though this journal had been passed around by dozens of people over many years, all of whom had found it here. She read slowly, her tea forgotten beside her. May 12, 1976, she came in crying. Not loud, just quietly dissolving. I offered her the armchair and some orange spice tea. She read poetry for an hour. When she left, she smiled once. Just once. That was enough. Asterisk entry from Myra, undated. I found this book in the back behind the atlases. I didn't mean to take it. I just opened it and started writing. I didn't know how much I needed to tell someone, anyone, even just the page. October 3rd, 1989. A man came in with 3 books and a bruised eye. He wouldn't say what happened. I let him shelve the books himself. He chose the shelf labeled Journeys. Then he left. Never came back. I still wonder what path he chose. Ella turned page after page, absorbing the words like sunlight. Each story felt like a window, a brief look into someone's soul, etched in ink and left behind like a footprint. At the very back, she found a newer entry, fresher ink. Clearly recent. March 11, 2024, Simon told me she might come back. The girl who lingers in the memoir section. The one who reads quietly, as though listening for something. I think she heard it today. The shop is ready. Hope she is. Ella stared at the entry, her breath caught somewhere between surprise and recognition. Was that about her? She flipped back, rereading the final lines. The girl in the memoir section. That was her. She'd lingered there for weeks, unsure what she was looking for. And the entry had been made before she'd even spoken to Malcolm, before she'd even met him properly. The shop is ready. I hope she is. Her fingers closed around the edge of the page. Something about that line made her feel like a door had opened inside her. One she hadn't realized had been locked. Simon reappeared at the doorway, noticing her expression. Everything all right? Ella looked up slowly. Simon, did you know this journal was down here? He shook his head. No, but the archives have a way of hiding things until they're needed. She hesitated. I think this was left for me. He didn't seem surprised. Then it's yours. Ella held the journal in her lap. What is this place, really? I mean, I know it's a bookshop, and you and Malcolm keep it running. But this is more than just sorting shelves and recommending novels. Simon leaned against the doorframe. It's what you need it to be. A refuge, a mirror, a beginning. Some places offer escape. This one offers return. To what? To yourself, he said softly. To who you were before the world got loud. They stood in silence for a long moment, the rain pattering against the basement window like a steady heartbeat. Eventually, Simon smiled. You hungry? I brought scones. Ella followed him back upstairs, the journal hugged against her chest. She didn't fully understand what she'd found, what it meant, but she felt something shift in her, not just curiosity, purpose. That night, she wrote the first entry of her own into the journal. July 13, 2025, I came here looking for quiet. I found a whisper instead, a soft invitation to listen more closely. I think I've been waiting for someone to hand me a pen. I didn't realize it would be myself. Oh, to whoever reads this next, leave something behind. Oh, even just a sentence. We all echo louder when we're not alone. The secret in an old novel. The novel wasn't supposed to be special. It was a late Thursday afternoon, and the shop was quiet. The kind of hush that settles in when the rain has fallen long enough to lull even the traffic into stillness. Ella had come by without much purpose. She wasn't meeting Simon, and Malcolm had disappeared into one of his moods and been tucked away in his office like a ghost of a librarian, glimpsed only in candlelight. She was here because the shop felt more like home now than her apartment. The upstairs fiction section had long been her favorite. It wasn't the newest or the neatest half, the shelves were mismatched, and several leaned slightly to the left, but it had character. It had comfort. The middle row, marked only by a hand-painted wooden sign that read Classics, dusty and otherwise, was where she found the book. The Seashell Hour, by Vivian A. Schcombe.la, frowned as she pulled it from the shelf. She didn't recognize the author. The cover was a deep teal with embossed gold lettering, weathered but elegant. The spine cracked softly as she opened it, the scent of aged paper rising like a whisper from the past. She flipped to the copyright page, 1946. The pages were thin, yellowed at the edges, but intact. She was about to move on when something odd caught her eye. The book had been hollowed out. Not the whole thing, just the center of the last 100 pages. A rectangular space had been carefully carved into the paper. Inside, wrapped in a pale blue ribbon, was a folded letter. Ella stared. For a moment, she simply held the book in her hands, heart thudding softly in the stillness. The rain outside had become rhythmic, almost hypnotic, and the discovery felt like something out of a film, unexpected, intimate, almost magical. She hesitated, then slid the ribbon off and unfolded the letter. It was written in ink, the handwriting flowing, but rushed. Dated August 3, 1952. The one who finds this. If you are reading this, then either I was too much of a coward or time decided for me. I hid this letter because I didn't know what else to do, because saying things aloud felt dangerous, but writing them down felt like freedom. Her name was Clara. She worked here, in the shop. Not many knew that women weren't often listed as co-nors back then, even when they did more than half the work. But Clara was the shop. She brought in the poems, the armchairs, the tea. She brought me to life. We couldn't be open. Then, not really. Not in the way we wanted, so we hid what we felt between the shelves and the stories. She would press notes into books and leave them for me to find. Meet me in the travel section at 7, or page 132, you'll understand. We made a life out of moments. When she left for Paris, I told her I'd follow. I didn't. I couldn't. I told myself I needed to keep the shop alive, that someone had to stay behind. But the truth was afraid of a life that didn't fit neatly between pages. If you find this letter, and maybe you know what that kind of love feels like. Maybe you'll do better than I did. Ella read the letter 3 times before she folded it back along its original creases. She sat on the window bench, staring out at the rain-slick street below. Her chest felt tight, not with sadness exactly, but with a strange blend of longing and tenderness. It was like finding someone else's heart. Tucked into a drawer, she heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Malcolm standing at the end of the shed. He wasn't watching her yet. Somehow, she knew he'd known exactly where she was and what she'd found. You saw it, he said, not as a question. Ella held up the novel. Who were they? She asked. Clara and E. Malcolm stepped closer. He looked tired, or perhaps simply older than she usually allowed herself to see. His usual reserve was softened, worn down like beach glass. Clara Ashcombe was the real founder of this shop, he said softly. She used her inheritance to buy the space in 1945, officially. It was her cousin Edgar who signed the lease. But Clara was the soul. Ella whispered. Edgar. Malcolm nodded. He kept the shop running after she left. He was quiet, solitary, but he loved her in his way. In his way. Couldn't follow her. He told himself it was duty. But maybe he just wasn't brave enough. Ella traced the edge of the letter with her thumb. Do you think Clara knew he felt that way? Malcolm gave a wry smile. Clara knew everything, but she waited too long for someone who couldn't cross the sea. Silence settled between them. I think, Malcolm said finally, he left the letter here, hoping someone would read it. One day, not for closure. Just so the story wouldn't disappear. Ella looked down at the journal again. It didn't. No, Malcolm said. You found it. Later that evening, after Simon had locked the front door and the storm had passed, Ella sat in the reading nook with the letter beside her and the journal from the archives on her lap. It felt right to add something to let this moment be part of something bigger. She opened the journal to a fresh page. July 13, 2025. Today I found a letter hidden inside a novel. A love story from 70 years ago. Clara and Edgar. One stayed. One left, and in the space between them, this bookshop lived on. I think that's what stories do. They hold the weight of our choices and carry them forward. I wish I could tell Edgar that I understand. And I wish I could tell Clara that she was worth following. Maybe this shop remembers the people we try to forget. Maybe that's why it still stands. She closed the journal gently, as though not to disturb the quiet. Simon appeared then, a steaming mug in one hand. Still here, still reading. He handed her the tea and nodded at the book beside her. Did you know that one hasn't been checked out in 40 years? Les smiled. It wasn't finished telling its story. The next day, the letter was placed in a small frame beside a photo Malcolm dug out from one of the back drawers. It showed two figures standing in front of the bookshop, their faces shadowed by the awning. One wore a long coat and a hat. The other a dress with a ribbon tied at the waist. No caption. No date. But the photograph went up in the travel section, just beside a shelf labeled journeys.ela. Visited it often, not because she expected the story to change, but because it reminded her that some secrets aren't meant to stay buried. That love quiet, unfinished, or unspoken still leaves an imprint, and in the little bookshop on the corner. Some stories wait patiently for just the right person to turn the page. Romantic connection begins. By now, Ella had a rhythm. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she visited the little bookshop on the corner. On rainy days, she curled up with a pot of tea in the reading nook. On sunny ones, she helped Simon with shelving, or wandered the shop's twisting paths, discovering new alcoves like secret gardens tucked between shelves. She had a favorite chair, a favorite teacup, even a favorite sound. The soft creak of the floorboards when Simon moved behind the counter. It was never anything grand, but it made her feel grounded. So when Simon suggested they reorganize the travel section together on a quiet Thursday, she said yes without thinking. The morning passed easily. The two of them worked in companionable silence, unpacking a pair of old crates from a donation the week before. Travel guides, memoirs, a few coffee table books on forgotten cities. Occasionally, they exchanged glances over particularly strange titles. Railway dining across the Balkans got a raised eyebrow from Simon. Bathing in Budapest, a cultural memoir, made Ella laugh so hard she nearly spilled tea on her lap. And then, in a lull between laughter and quiet, it happened. Simon was standing just inches away, turning a book over in his hands. Ella looked up to say something she couldn't remember what, and met his gaze. It was brief. Only a moment. But something shifted. They both froze. Not awkwardly. Not entirely. It was like stumbling across a memory you hadn't made yet. His expression softened just slightly. Her heartbeat thudded with a suddenness that startled her. She looked away first, pretended to brush dust from a stack of books. Simon cleared his throat. "You all right?" "Fine," she said, too quickly. But that moment didn't dissolve. It lingered when they broke for lunch. Ella found herself hyper-aware of everything, the way Simon passed her the sugar for her tea, without asking. The way his fingers grazed hers for just a second too long. The way his voice dropped, warm and low, when they talked about Paris, and he admitted he'd never been, but always meant to go. "I wanted to write a travel book once," he said, looking out the shop's front window as rain began to fall again. "You?" Ella smiled. "You're not the travel memoir type." Simon gave a small laugh. "No. What type am I then?" She opened her mouth, then paused. Because she didn't know. Not really. She knew he loved quiet music and poetry with sad endings. She knew he had 3 different types of chamomile in the back tea cabinet and a habit of humming when he shelved books. But beyond that, she wasn't sure. "You're the stand listen type," she said finally. Simon looked at her, surprised, then nodded. "That sounds about right." That afternoon, they didn't talk much. They worked. They moved. They paused. But the silences had changed. They weren't filled with absence anymore, they were full of possibility. The next day, Ella came back even though she didn't need to. She told herself she was picking up a book she'd ordered. But the truth, humming quietly in the back of her mind, was that she wanted to see if that moment from yesterday had been real, or if she'd imagined the whole thing. Simon wasn't behind the counter. Instead, Malcolm stood there with his usual half-smile, shuffling a few receipts and looking, as always, vaguely like he belonged to a different century. "He's in the back," Malcolm said without prompting. Ella blinked. "I didn't say anything." "You didn't have to," he replied. She hesitated, then walked toward the back room. As she approached, she heard soft music, something instrumental. Piano and strings, and the murmur of Simon humming under his breath. When she stepped inside, he looked up. "Ella," he said, his voice warm. "I wasn't sure you were coming." "Today, I wasn't sure either," she admitted. "I came to pick up a book." He smiled. "Of course." But neither of them mentioned the moment from yesterday. Not directly. Instead, they spent the afternoon together again, sorting, laughing, talking. At one point, he offered her a mug of his experimental rose, Earl Grey, and she made a face so dramatic he nearly spilled the pot, laughing. It was easy, and that terrified her. That night, she sat in her apartment with the lights low, thinking about how quiet everything felt outside the shop. Her journal sat open in her lap. She didn't know how to start the entry. So she began mid-thought. July 17th, 2025, I think something is beginning. Or maybe I'm just beginning to notice. Simon looks at me like I'm a poem, he affirms. I'm scared of that. I'm scared of being seen and still being left behind. But I'm more scared of pretending I don't see it too. There's something in the quiet. Something blooming. The next week passed like a slow song. They didn't rush. No grand declarations. No hand-holding. No sweeping gestures. Just more time. More glances. More of everything soft. Ella helped host a small poetry night in the shop. Simon stood in the corner, listening quietly, clapping when she finished her reading. Their eyes met, and he mouthed the word brilliant. She laughed because her hands were shaking, and he knew it. And that one word felt like steadiness. A few days later, they rearranged the gardening books. He found a note tucked inside one, page 132, "You'll understand." It made her heart ache and swell all at once. She showed him the letter from Clara and Edgar, and for the first time, he reached out just for a moment, Hand touched her hand. "Thank you," he said, voice low. They didn't need to say for what. Then came the Sunday picnic. Simon suggested it casually, like it wasn't a question at all. "Supposed to be sunny for once," he said. "There's a small park down near Wilmot Street. You know it?" Ella nodded, "with the big willow trees." "That's the one." A pause. "You could bring a book. You could bring scones." He grinned. "Deal." They met under one of the willows, a faded tartan blanket spread between them. Simon had indeed brought scones, lavender and lemon, homemade, slightly too crumbly, but delicious. Ella brought a dog-eared novel she hadn't been able to finish. They didn't read. Instead, they talked, really talked about the years before the shop, about missed chances and what-ifs, about loneliness and the ways they'd each learned to live around it. Like ivy curling around stone, Simon told her about his father's old record collection, about the heartbreak that made him leave his publishing job, about how the little bookshop on the corner wasn't just a job, but a quiet salvation. Ella told him about the design career she'd almost pursued in New York, about the friend she'd lost touch with, about how she'd been waiting for life to start for so long. She hadn't noticed when it finally did. He listened, like he always did, but this time, she saw the way his eyes softened when she spoke, how he leaned in, hands curled around a mug of thermos tea, like her words were the fire in front of them. Then, as the sky faded into golden hour, he said softly, "I'm glad you got lost that day." She looked up. "What?" "You said you found the shop by accident. A wrong turn." Ella smiled. "Some accidents are the best decisions I never made." There was a pause, then a shift, and he kissed her. Not rushed, not sweeping. Just a quiet, honest kiss that tasted like lemon and tea and something sweet she couldn't name. When they pulled back, she saw that he looked a little nervous. Just a little. She laughed softly, nervously too. So, he said, brushing a curl from her cheek. "Can I walk you home?" That night, she wrote again in her journal. July 20th, 2025. It happened. It finally, actually happened. No lightning bolts. No fireworks, just hands brushing, scones crumbling, words shared beneath a willow tree. And then his mouth on mine, gentle and sure. I think that's the most romantic thing in the world. Not the kiss, but the way he waited for me to feel ready. I didn't fall. I leaned, and he caught me like he knew I was already on my way. The next day, as she entered the bookshop, the bell above the door chimed brighter somehow. Simon stood behind the counter, a smile already waiting. He didn't say anything at first. He just held out a book. Ella took it. It was a copy of the Seashell Hour. Rebound in blue linen. Inside, he'd inscribed one line, page 132, "You'll understand." And on page 132, Ella found his handwriting again. "You're the story I didn't know I'd been writing all this time." Conflict or misunderstanding. It began, as many small storms do, with silence. Not the cozy kind that lingered between pages in the shop's reading nook. Not the familiar hush of the rainy afternoons they had come to love. This was a different kind of silence, tight and brittle, like a window that had been shut just a bit too hard. It started with a phone call. Ella had arrived at the bookshop early, carrying 2 coffees from the place on Willow Street that Simon liked best. She was smiling, still warm from the memory of their walk the night before. They'd stayed out under the willow trees well past dusk, hands clasped. His voice in her ears soft and sure as they talked about the future hypotheticals, mostly. Possibilities. Paris, a weekend by the coast. Her hand in his, she pushed open the shop door and the bell chimed. The scent of paper and tea greeted her like always. But the moment she stepped inside, she sensed something different. Simon stood. Behind the counter, phone in one hand, jaw tense. He didn't see her at first. "Right," he said into the receiver. "Yes, I understand. I wasn't expecting that." A pause. "No, it's not that I'm unwilling. It's just sudden." Ella froze, coffee cups warm against her palms. "I'll think about it," Simon said, then hung up without another word. Their eyes met. She smiled, tentative. "Morning. Hey," he said, too quickly. "Sorry, didn't hear you come in." She placed the coffees on the counter. "Everything okay?" Tay hesitated. "Fine." The silence after that word said everything it didn't. He didn't tell her what the call was about, and Ella, not wanting to push, didn't ask again, but something shifted in the hours that followed. He wasn't cold, exactly, just distant, distracted. When she tried to joke with him over a box of mislabeled gardening books. Why does someone have a memoir called Growing Time for Love? He offered only a small smile. Not his usual kind. The one that crinkled his eyes and made her laugh before she even finished the punchline. She told herself it was nothing. A bad morning, an off day. Everyone had them. But the next day he was the same, and the day after that worse. By the fourth day, Ella's journal read, July 25th, 2025, he's slipping away. I don't know why. I keep reaching for him, and it's like he's stepping backward into a shadow I can't follow. Something's wrong, and he won't tell me. I want to believe it's not about me. But what if it is? She finally confronted him that Friday. They were sorting new arrivals upstairs when she turned sharply and said, "Simon, what's going on?" He looked up from the box, startled. "You've barely looked at me all week," she continued, heart racing. "You're quiet, you're distant. And you keep saying you're fine in that way. That means absolutely nothing." He blinked, as if trying to catch up. "I'm not trying to pick a fight," she said, softer now. "I just want to know where you've gone." Simon closed the box slowly, then leaned back against the shelf. "That call," he said finally, "was from an old friend. He's the editor at a small press in Edinburgh. There's an opening. A role I once said I'd kill to have. Managing a new fiction imprint. Travel, curation, mentoring new writers. He said the job is mine if I want it." Ella felt her stomach twist. "Edinburgh." He nodded. There was a long pause. "When would you go?" "End of August," she swallowed. "And you didn't think to tell me?" "I didn't know how to tell you." She stared at him, words trying to form and falling short. "Simon, we just started. And now you're what? Leaving?" "I don't know," he snapped, then instantly softened. "I don't know, Ella. That's the truth. This job was my dream before I even knew this shop existed. Before I knew you existed." Her voice was quiet. "Do you still want it?" "I don't know," he repeated. "That's what's killing me." She sat down on the edge of the window seat, gripping the armrest like it could anchor her. "Why didn't you talk to me?" she asked, eyes brimming. "Why shut me out for a week instead of just saying this? We could have faced it together." "'Cause I was afraid," he said. "Afraid that if I told you, it would hurt you. And afraid that if I didn't, I'd lose you anyway." She'll let that hang in the air. It hurt, but she saw the truth in it. "I don't want to be something you tiptoe around," she whispered. If this is something real, then it has to be real even when it's hard." Simon walked over and sat on the floor across from her. "I know," he said. "And I'm sorry, I didn't handle this right." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then he added, "I haven't said yes. Not yet. I didn't want to make a choice before I understood what I'd be giving up." Ella looked at him. "You'd be giving up the shop." He nodded. "You'd be giving up your home." Kay nodded again. Then, quietly, "I'd be giving up you." The next few days passed like a breath held too long. They didn't fight. They didn't cry. But they didn't quite fall back into place either. Ella kept visiting the shop, but her journal grew longer. Pages filled with questions she couldn't ask aloud, fears she couldn't name. And somewhere between the words, her heart began whispering truths she hadn't dared voice. She didn't want him to go. She wanted to wake up to tea, crooked shelves, and his hand in hers. She wanted the quiet joy of bookshop mornings and poetry. Nights and scones that crumbled too fast. She wanted him, but she wouldn't ask him to stay, because that wasn't love. That was fear. A week later, she found a note tucked inside a copy of Great Expectations. It wasn't from Clara or Edgar. It was from Simon Dottle. I've spent my whole life waiting for the next chapter. Always looking ahead, afraid to root too deeply, in case something better came along. I thought this job was the story I'd been waiting for. But I was wrong. It was you. You're not a chapter, Kayla. You're the whole book. And I'd rather stay in this story than start a dozen new ones alone. If you'll have me. She found him in the back room, surrounded by donation boxes and dust, staring out the window. He turned as she entered. I didn't send the application, he said. I know. I realized I'd be trading something I might love for something I already do. Ella stepped toward him. I want to be with someone who chooses their own path, even if it takes them far away. Simon reached for her hand. You are my path, he said quietly. She didn't speak. She kissed him instead. Later that night, as the sun slipped behind the shop's crooked roof, Ella wrote in her journal once more. August 1st, 2025 sometimes. Conflict doesn't come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it's two hearts trembling in the space between choices. We were both afraid of distance, of change, of each other. But love doesn't ask us to choose between dreams. It asks us to be brave enough to build new ones together. And that's what we're doing, one page at a time. Warm ending and shared passion for stories. It began, as many endings do, with a beginning not marked by grand gestures or sudden shifts, but by a quiet Saturday morning, golden with early sunlight and fragrant with cinnamon scones fresh from the oven. The bookshop smelled like home ink and old paper, polished wood, and the faint floral note of the tea steeping behind the counter. Ella was opening the shutters when she heard Simon humming in the kitchen. She paused, smiling to herself. It had been 6 months since that first picnic beneath the willow trees. 6 months since they had chosen not distance or doubt, but each other. They had grown their life together slowly, one shelf, one teacup, one shared chapter at a time. She didn't always know how to describe what they had. There wasn't a single word for it. But it lived in the way he saved the last scone for her without asking, in the way she remembered which books made him cry, in the comfortable silence they shared when reading at opposite ends of the same couch. Their love was built, not found, and that, perhaps, made it even stronger. That afternoon, the shop filled with the low murmur of voices as the monthly readers and writers' tea began. It had become their tradition. On the first Saturday of every month, they invited the community to gather, locals, travelers, dreamers, anyone who loved stories. They pushed tables together, brewed too much tea, and opened the floor to readings. Discussions, confessions about books that changed lives or hearts. Eli sat near the center, her journal open, fingers ink-stained from notes and margin quotes. Simon stood near the window, listening as an older woman read a poem about growing up during the war. Behind him, the sky was turning pale orange with the approach of sunset at some point. He glanced at Ella and smiled. She smiled back. After the readings, while everyone was gathered around shortbread and second cups of tea, a teenage girl approached the counter, clutching a worn notebook. Miss Ella. Ella turned. "Hi, Chloe. Can I show you something?" the girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Of course. Chloe opened her notebook, revealing a short story she'd written in delicate cursive. Ella read it carefully, eyes softening as the story unfolded, a tale about a girl who found an abandoned bookshop in the forest and slowly brought it back to life. When she finished, she looked up. "This is beautiful. Do you think it's good enough?" Chloe asked. "For people to read?" Ella leaned forward. "I think stories are like seeds. Some need time, some need light, some need rain. But if you tend to them with care, they all grow. This one, it's already blooming." Chloe beamed behind her. Simon had been listening. He stepped forward, holding a small wrapped package. "I think," he said gently, "this might help." He handed Chloe a brand new journal. Hand-bound, deep green with gold-etched corners. "For your next story." He said, tears welled in the girl's eyes as she clutched the gift to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. And just like that, another story had begun. That evening, when the shop had emptied and the dishes were done, Ella and Simon sat on the steps just outside the front door. The night was warm, the air scented with lilacs from the florist 2 doors down. They sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing a thermos of tea, watching the world quiet around them. "I love today," Ella said. "Me too." There was a long pause. "Sometimes I wonder," she said, "what would have happened if I'd turned a different corner that day." Simon smiled faintly. "You would have found your way here eventually. You think so?" "I think the stories that matter always find their reader." She leaned against him. "Even if they take the long way, especially if they take the long way." He looked down at her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You've changed this place," he said. Ella glanced up. "I think it changed me." They fell quiet again, letting the moment breathe. Then Simon said, "Malcolm wants to retire." Ella blinked. "Really? He told me last week. Said he's going to live on the coast, right? Maybe garden. He wants to gift the shop to us." "To us?" Simon nodded. "He said it's never belonged to one person. It belongs to stories. 2 caretakers. He thinks we're ready to take it from here." Ella didn't speak right away. Her heart beat faster, and yet everything inside her felt still. "I don't think I've ever wanted anything more," she said softly. Simon smiled. "Me neither." 2 weeks later, they held a quiet celebration. Friends, neighbors, long time patrons. Chloe read her new story. Malcolm, dressed in a linen suit, raised a toast with Earl Grey, and Ella and Simon stood together behind the counter. Hands intertwined as the guests trickled out, one by one, and the sky faded into starlight. Ella wandered back into the reading room. It looked just the same as it had on her first day. Same creaky chair. Same tartan throw. Same soft lamplight. But it felt entirely different now. It felt like hers. She sat and opened the blue journal, the one she'd found long ago in the archives, once blank, now brimming with entries in her looping hand. She turned to the back page and began to write. August 22nd, 2025. Today, the bookshop became ours, not as a business, not even as a building, but as a promise to keep listening, to hold stories gently, to create a space where quiet lives can find their voices and loud lives can learn to listen. Simon and I started as readers, and we became writers of our own story. Now we are caretakers. Not all love stories burn. Some glow. And some, like this one, turn pages slowly, patiently, till one day you realize you've written a life. She closed the journal, outside the room. Simon was cleaning up the last of the teacups. Music played softly on the old record player. The cat, still unnamed, curled on the rug, purring contentedly. Ella rose and walked to the front of the shop. Simon looked up and smiled. She took his hand. "Come sit." She said they returned to the reading nook and curled into the old chair together. Knees tangled, a soft blanket across their laps. On the table beside them sat a novel neither had read yet. Ella picked it up, opened to the first page, and began to read aloud. Simon leaned his head against hers and listened. And in the little bookshop on the corner, the story continued. And that brings us to the end of today's journey through time and through English. We hope you not only learned something new about history, but also picked up useful English words, phrases, and expressions along the way. Remember, the more you listen, the more fluent you become. And when you learn through stories, it sticks. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss an episode of English Insight. Got a favorite historical era or topic you'd like us to explore in English Next? Drop it in the comments. We're always listening. Thanks for learning with us. Keep practicing, keep exploring, and as always, stay curious. See you in the next video.